Hello, and welcome to the Rethink Ed training on a closer look at targets. Today's training is going to focus on scaffolding instruction, how we set targets, what they are, and why we use them, the importance of maintaining a skill, finally clicking the mastery button, and then how to adjust targets if instruction changes. When we talk about scaffolding instruction, we want to think of it as a building. Buildings don't start at the top or in the middle, but they start at the bottom and work their way up layer by layer. When we scaffold instruction in special education, we're doing the same thing. We're not starting in the middle of a skill or with the whole thing, but we break it down into components, mastering each step one at a time so that our students can make small steps and progress towards their goals. When we can break our skills down into small, meetable steps, we often see this type of progress for our students. At the beginning, it might be going slow. The student is learning that skill for the first time. They're not very fluent, and each teaching step is going uphill on a roller coaster. As that student becomes more proficient in the early steps, they'll usually start to build this type of momentum from all of the structure practices so that that skill becomes more natural and they can coast with lots of progress. In Rethink Ed, we call each of these individual teaching steps a target. So why do we use targets? First, it keeps students and educators focused. As educators, you're responsive to each student's needs, and scaffolding and setting targets enable students to maintain engagement and motivation to complete each step towards their goal. Next, it generates formative data that is useful to educators. When students encounter instructional scaffolding through instruction, their responses are aligned to their development. Educators can use this data to inform instruction and effective teaching. Next, it reduces that anxiety and uncertainty. Instruction that offers scaffolding maximizes learning and eliminates the potential anxiety caused by a too difficult task. Think about the first time you learned a really difficult task in school. Often it caused anxiety, or you might have not wanted to go to that class because you knew you couldn't master the skill. When we scaffold, it also serves feedback about correctness, preventing those misconceptions about what is being taught in the classroom. And lastly, it creates that momentum. With embedded scaffolding, wrong answers and challenges in learning are met with that timely assistance, leading to a powerful teaching opportunity that benefits each child where they need it the most. When we scaffold our instruction, we are doing so based on the individual needs of each learner. If we look at both of these IEP goals, they're the same goal, to identify letters of the alphabet. However, we'll notice that the learning needs of each student are not the same. If we look at Jessica, we know that we need to start slowly before she understands the concept, whereas Daniel can handle those larger groupings of letters early on and still make progress. When we break our skills down into their small steps or targets, we need to make sure that we are being sensitive to each student's learning ability and provide our instruction as small steps. This is necessary for that student to be successful and gain that momentum that we talked about earlier on. We all know that art students have trouble remembering skills that were previously taught. Because of this, it is so important that we build maintenance targets into scaffolded instruction so that we can continue to practice the learned skills as we progress. For example, we have target 1, which is A and B. Target 2, we have C and D. The most important step is instead of going on and doing the alphabet this way, we need to build in maintenance targets. And what that means is once the student masters A and B, and then masters C and D, we need to quiz that student on every single letter together. This is a maintenance target, A, B, C, and D. When we add in this target, what we're doing is checking for maintenance. We're making sure that this student maintained that earlier target and is able to handle older information and newer information together. Next, after the student has maintained A, B, C, and D, we now know that it's ready to introduce a new target. So we might teach E and F. Then once again, we're going to maintain that skill for the student. So after they've mastered E and F, we're going to check for maintenance and start back over at A through F. This is making sure we're sensitive to the student's learning needs and we're breaking it down so that it reflects their learning. After we have this maintenance, we'll teach some new targets, G and H, and then once again, we're going to come back and make sure that that student maintained A through H, and so on. So you'll notice that once you teach new skills, it's very important to check for maintenance. Most teachers are anyways going to check for maintenance just in your daily instruction. When we put in these targets that have those maintenance steps in it, it's ensuring that we're also collecting that data. When you're in your student's learning plan, this is how you would set up your targets. You're going to come down here and click Add Target every time you need to add a new target. Keep in mind, you can add targets as you go. You do not need to build out the student's learning plan entirely at the beginning of the year. This ensures that whatever instructional changes need to be made, we can adjust it in the student's Rethink Learning Plan. As you'll notice, we set up the targets A and B, C and D, then we have our maintenance target here. We introduced a new couple letters, E and F, and then once again, we're checking for maintenance here with A through F. When you get into your data collection area, you're going to start with the first step or target only. So you just check on A and B, begin collecting data. Once that student masters that target, you're going to come to the second one, collect the data on C and D. Once they master that target, you'll come back and do your maintenance check with A, B, C, and D. When you collect data, the program will track the mastery criteria that you set for the targets so you don't have to. This graph shows very clearly how you've broken down your instruction to meet the learning needs of your students. So down here we have the targets. We have A and B, C and D, and then our maintenance target A, B, C, and D. You can see in this graph when we went back to maintenance, right here, that the student is taking a little longer to master the skill. That is okay. They probably need this extra practice so you can be sure that they really know the skill. Keep in mind, we've been teaching 2 letters at a time. So while we're used to seeing this progress, it's absolutely normal that when we introduce 4 letters at a time, the student may take a little longer to master that skill. This is a really awesome graph to show parents because it's easy for them to read and it shows how you're individualizing your instruction and really quickly where the child is struggling and most importantly, where they're succeeding. In the past, you might have been really scared and avoided pressing this mastery button and instead clicked continue to recording data. As we mentioned earlier, this is totally normal. You as the teacher understand that at times your students do regress in a skill and you want to make sure that you're continuing to collect data on each of those targets. Well, now that you've gone ahead and put in maintenance targets, you can absolutely go ahead and click Mark as Mastered and move on to the next one. You can confidently now say that yes, your student has mastered this target because you know that you're going to continue to maintain that skill throughout. Don't forget, in all of your scaffolded instruction going forward, you're going to add maintenance targets throughout your instruction. So now you can be super brave and click that Mastery button. Once you click the Mastery button, you will be prompted to choose your next target. If you need to set a new one, click Create New Teaching Target. And that's going to be right here. So if you're building your targets as you go, feel free to just click Create New Teaching Target every time the student masters out the target. Sometimes you might be teaching a skill and the student just is not doing well on the target. In this example, you thought that your student might be able to handle sequencing numbers 1 through 10. Clearly, when we go back and look at our graph, this target is too big. The student is not making progress on this skill. So we need to adjust our instruction and make it smaller. This is super easy to adjust and rethink. You're just going to come back into the learning plan, click on hold, and then come down here and add a new target. Back to the data, and then you're going to choose the right target. Clearly the student is now doing better. You can see that because you were able to break it down, 1 through 10 was just too big. When we went back to adjust our targets and just made it 1 through 5, you now see that that student made immediate progress. So now we can see when we look at the graph that because of our intervention and adjusting our instruction, the student is back on track making progress with their 1 through 10 goal. If I were presenting, this might be what I said to a parent. After I adjusted my targets, I created the 1 through 5, then I went back and created the 1 through 8, and now I'm ready to teach the 1 through 10. This is what I'd say. When we first started teaching this skill, we started with sequencing numbers 1 through 10, down here. As you can see by the graph between 1-3 and 1-6, he wasn't doing very well. So we decided to break the skill up into smaller steps to see if this would help with learning. We started with 1 through 5 between 1-9 and 1-12. As you can see, he was able to do really well and mastered the target. Then we added another step, 1 through 8, as shown here on the pink line. He was able to master that skill as well. We then returned to the original teaching step on 1-15. And as you can see here on the blue line, and we have begun working on this step for the last 4 days, and as you'll notice, there's steady momentum and progress. We anticipate that the student will be able to master this target soon, and we can move on to the next step. This data is really helpful in showing us as teachers that the student probably needed to learn in smaller chunks initially until he could build that fluency and momentum with the skill. So where do we go from here? Well, the first step will be to check your student progress. Just click on the data button in Data Express. If your students are making progress on the target that you have set, then there's nothing to do. But if your students are not making progress or progress is not timely, perhaps you need to make an adjustment. Go back into your student's learning plan, put the current target on hold, set your new target, and get rolling. Don't forget, there's no reason now that you cannot click the mastery button. You are breaking down your skill into smaller steps, and you are adding targets to check for mastery throughout. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.